For many years, issues involving women's rights and African American rights were, and sometimes are, considered independent of each other. While these movements were concerned with equal rights for two separate groups, both dealt with similar issues, such as voting rights, and were completely different. Civil rights leader Dorothy Height was aware of this. Born in Jim Crow South, she was known for blending the fight for racial equality with a struggle for gender rights. She is often considered the matriarch of the civil rights movement. She brought the issues of black women and sexism in the original racial equality movement to the forefront. She was the president of the National Council of Negro Women, worked on the national staff of the YWCA, served as national president of the Delta Sigma Theta sorority, organized Wednesdays in Mississippi, which brought black and white women from the North and South together to help build a relationship between the two, was the woman team member leader in the United Civil Rights Leadership, founded the Women's Center for Education and Career Advancement in New York, served on the President's Committee on the Employment of the Handicapped and the President's Committee on the Status of Women, and acted as an advisor to President Barack Obama, while also influencing Eleanor Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, and Lyndon Johnson's opinions on racial equality. It wouldn't be an overstatement to say that she is one of the most accomplished civil rights leaders to date.
Dorothy Height was born in Richmond, Virginia on March 24, 1912, to her loving mother of 40, Fan Burroughs, and father James Height, both twice widowed. The Height clan decided to move north in search of work as part of the greater migration of African Americans, all hopeful for fruitful employment in northern industry and to escape the rural Jim Crow South. Height was merely 4 years old when they arrived in Rankin, Pennsylvania. The town was a mixing pot of different nationalities. Though racial tensions were a trial for many, Height enjoyed a childhood free from the worst of racism. On almost any evening in our neighborhood, you could hear Italians on one side of the street and Croatians or Germans on the other side. But one prominent Jewish family owned the butcher shop. I have many happy memories of being together with people who were so different from us. Height first got involved in civil rights after being dragged along to church meetings with her mother, an active member of the Pennsylvania Federation of Colored Women's Clubs. There, she grew an appreciation for the struggle, and was inspired by the Congresswoman Maud Coleman. She went on to be a distinguished scholar, graduating high school as a valedictorian and with a $1,000 four-year college scholarship for oratory skills discussing the Constitution of the United States. But as her success grew, she began to feel the injustices of racism. She was barely allowed to be a part of her high school basketball team, being barred from play during a key game. She was also barred from her position as student director of the choir by the principal, until the choir refused to sing until she was reinstated. She was even denied by her preferred college of Barnard in New York due to their filling of their quota of black students, too. She then decided to go to New York University and graduated in 3 years, earning a master's degree in educational psychology in her 4th year.
In 1933, Height became a leader of the United Christian Youth Movement of North America when she advocated to end lynchings, desegregate the military, reform the criminal justice system, and equalize public facilities. She went on to join the National Council on Negro Women after she was noticed by Mary McLeod Bethune at Harlem's YWCA as she was escorting Eleanor Roosevelt into the facility. For the next 33 years, she served on the national board of the YWCA, and in 1965 she was elected for the position of director of the Center for Racial Justice. In 1970, Height established the Women's Center for Education and Career, which helped prepare young women for entry-level jobs. This was one aspect of Dorothy Height's unique blend of feminism and civil rights. In 1960, she became the woman team member leader in the United Civil Rights Leadership along with Martin Luther King Jr. She would often be the only woman in important dialogues about civil rights. She would talk with Eleanor Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, and even wrote to Lyndon Johnson about issues involving civil rights. Throughout her life, she was very active in the Delta Sigma Theta sorority, where she organized the leadership conferences and interracial education opportunities. Dorothy Height was concerned with both women's rights and African American rights. She wanted to create a dialogue of understanding between women of all colors, as shown by her Wednesdays in Mississippi, which was an event that brought black and white women together. She also worked to draw more attention to issues involving black women, which were often ignored by the primary civil rights movement. However, her heaviest influence was on the National Council of Negro Women, which she was president of during the 60s.
The late 1950s marked a time of transition for civil rights. The earlier leaders were generally the people whom W.E.B. Du Bois would have referred to as the talented tenth, or highly educated men and women from the middle or upper classes. However, as the century moved into its second half, people from more humble backgrounds began to rise up, demanding their share as well. To accommodate these changes, the National Council of Negro Women, or NCNW, needed a new champion, and Dr. Dorothy Height fit the bill. During Height's early years as president, she maintained the goals of past years. The organization held a benefit in 1960 to memorialize Mary Beth Youn, former NCNW president and inspiration to Height. In coming years, Height worked to publicize the horror stories of arrested black female civil rights leaders, who had often been strip-searched or even raped in jail. While these were worthy and just causes, Height soon decided to move the NCNW in a new direction. Rather than focusing on the black women leaders of her time, she decided to shift towards movements for the benefit of women and children of all races. One of the first examples of this change was in the summer of 1964 in Mississippi, where there was the most violent resistance to black rights at the time. The YWCA, National Council of Jewish Women, National Council of Catholic Women, Church Women United, and the NCNW all joined forces to help Southern black children. In helping to organize this effort, Height began to bridge the gap between races for the benefit of everyone. Height's fight for black children in Mississippi was also another of the many instances in which she supported the younger members of the civil rights movement. A few years afterward, in 1967, black students, frustrated over the centuries of injustice toward their people, started a series of riots in cities throughout the United States. While many condemned the rioters as needlessly violent, Height described to the press how these men and women only fought back because the recent civil rights legislation did little for blacks in the lower classes. She's quoted in the St. Petersburg Times. The 1964 Civil Rights Act brought great expectations and no results. It was only a first step, providing more job offers to the Negro with a PhD who already had more offers than he could answer. But what about the black tenant farmer who can't even read? When Dorothy Height said this, she was merging another two groups, the older members of groups like the NCNW, and the students of the riots. Despite all of Dr. Height's accomplishments, she's often ignored in textbooks and lessons about the civil rights movement, even though she was a critical member of several well-known historic events. Many Americans are familiar with Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech that he gave on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial during the famous 1963 March on Washington. A lesser-known aspect of this noteworthy moment in history was that Dorothy Height was the only woman to attend the planning meetings for the event. She even appears with Dr. King in several photos taken around the time of the march.
Dorothy Height continued to be a civil rights leader later in her life. She founded the African American Women for Reproductive Rights in 1994, and she became an advisor on civil rights for the Obama administration. She would often meet with the president, having had 21 meetings with him in the White House before she passed in 2010. Here, President Obama reminisces on some of his favorite moments with her at her memorial service, and remembers her life and the influence Dr. Height had on the world.
But we remember her not solely for all she did during the civil rights movement. We remember her for all she did over a lifetime, behind the scenes, to broaden the movement's reach, to shine a light on stable families and tight-knit communities, to make us see the drive for civil rights and women's rights not as a separate struggle, but as part of a larger movement to secure the rights of all humanity, regardless of gender, regardless of race, regardless of ethnicity. It's an unambiguous record of righteous work, worthy of remembrance, worthy of recognition. And yet, one of the ironies is that year after year, decade in, decade out, Dr. Height went about her work quietly, without fanfare, without self-promotion. She never cared about who got the credit. She didn't need to see her picture in the papers. She understood that the movement gathered strength from the bottom up. Those unheralded men and women who don't always make it into the history books, but who steadily insisted on their dignity, on their manhood and womanhood. She wasn't interested in credit. What she cared about was the cause of justice, the cause of equality, the cause of opportunity, freedom's cause.